I was about to drive to the meeting that would decide my late husband's entire inheritance when a homeless man stepped toward my car and quietly said, "Ma'am, before you sign anything today, you deserve to know the truth about Daniel Whitmore." I remember freezing with my hand on the door handle, the early morning sun reflecting off the windshield, and the quiet suburban streets suddenly feeling unfamiliar, as if something invisible had shifted beneath the surface of my life. My name is Margaret Whitmore, I'm 68 years old, and until that moment I believed I understood exactly what my future looked like. My husband Daniel had passed away 6 weeks earlier after 42 years of marriage, and since then my days had moved with a strange, mechanical rhythm. Coffee in the same blue mug he bought me 20 years ago, the sound of the morning news filling the silence of the kitchen, and the steady parade of paperwork that follows when a life shared for decades suddenly becomes a stack of legal documents. That morning was supposed to be the final step. At 10 o'clock sharp, I had a meeting with the estate attorney downtown to review the inheritance Daniel had left behind. My son Ryan and his wife Ashley had insisted on coming along, explaining that legal matters could be confusing and that they wanted to help me navigate everything. I had believed them, of course. Ryan was my only child, the boy who once slept with a baseball glove under his pillow and called me every night during his first semester of college because he said the dorm felt too quiet. And Ashley, well, she had always been polite, always smiling, always ready with a helpful suggestion about finances or property or how the house might be too much for one person now. None of it had seemed suspicious. Not then. I stood there beside my silver sedan in the driveway, staring at the man who had spoken. He looked like someone life had pushed to the margins. His coat was worn and several sizes too large, his beard gray and uneven, but his eyes were steady in a way that caught my attention immediately. He didn't look desperate or confused. He looked certain. For a moment I wondered if I had misheard him. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice cautious but calm. He glanced briefly down the street as if making sure no one else was listening. "You're going to a meeting about your husband's estate," he said quietly. "But the story you've been told isn't the whole story." The words settled into the morning air like a stone dropped into still water. My first instinct was to assume this was some kind of mistake. After all, strangers don't usually approach widows in quiet neighborhoods with warnings about inheritance meetings. Yet something about the way he spoke made it impossible to dismiss him entirely. It wasn't dramatic or emotional. It was simple, almost matter-of-fact, as if he were stating the weather forecast. "How do you know my husband's name?" I asked. The man studied me for a long moment before answering. "Because I used to work for him." My mind searched quickly through decades of company picnics, retirement dinners, and holiday gatherings connected to Daniel's construction firm, Whitmore Development. The company had employed hundreds of people over the years, and I had met many of them, but I didn't recognize this man. "I'm sorry," I said gently, "but I don't believe we've met." He nodded, as if expecting that answer. "That's because I left before the big project's finished," he replied. "And before some things started happening that your husband didn't like." The quiet confidence in his voice made the hairs on my arms rise. I glanced at my watch. It was 9:12 a.m., which meant I had just enough time to drive downtown before the meeting. Ryan had texted earlier to say he and Ashley would meet me at the attorney's office. Everything had been planned neatly, efficiently, the way my son liked things organized. Yet now this stranger stood between me and the ordinary morning I thought I understood. "If you worked for Daniel," I said slowly, "then you know he passed away." The man's expression softened slightly. "Yes, ma'am." I heard. For a moment neither of us spoke. The quiet hum of a passing delivery truck drifted down the street. Somewhere a dog barked behind a fence. It felt like the world had paused, waiting for the next sentence. "What exactly are you trying to tell me?" I asked. He looked directly at me, and in that moment his tired appearance seemed almost irrelevant compared to the clarity in his eyes. "I'm telling you that if you walk into that meeting today and sign whatever papers they put in front of you, you might be giving away something your husband never intended anyone else to have." My chest tightened slightly, though I kept my voice steady. "My son would never," I stopped myself mid-sentence, surprised by how quickly the defense had come to my lips. The man didn't interrupt. He simply watched me with quiet patience. Ryan Whitmore is a good businessman, he said after a moment. But business decisions and family promises don't always follow the same rules. The sentence lingered in the air like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit yet. I thought about the last few weeks, the way Ryan had taken charge of phone calls from the company accountant, the way Ashley had gently suggested that selling Daniel's office building might be less stressful for everyone, the way both of them had reassured me that the inheritance meeting would be straightforward. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps grief was making my imagination wander into places it had no business going. And yet the stranger's warning echoed quietly in my thoughts. Before you sign anything today, you deserve to know the truth. I finally opened my car door but didn't get inside. Instead I turned back toward him. If what you're saying is important, I said carefully, then you should explain it. He hesitated for the first time, as if weighing how much to reveal. Not here, he said. And not in a hurry. Truth has a way of disappearing when people are rushing to meetings. I looked again at my watch. 9:17 a.m. The meeting that would determine the future of Daniel Whitmore's legacy was less than 40 minutes away, and suddenly the path leading to it felt far less certain than it had just a few minutes earlier. For several seconds I simply stood beside my car, unsure whether to leave or keep listening, because grief has a strange way of making even the smallest doubt feel enormous. Daniel had always been the one who handled complicated matters, especially when it came to the company and our finances. For more than 40 years our arrangement had been simple and comfortable. He built things, negotiated contracts, and kept track of the numbers. I kept our home steady, remembered birthdays, and made sure our lives felt warm even when his workdays stretched late into the evening. We trusted each other. Completely. That trust had never required questions. Until that morning. The stranger watched me quietly as I considered what to do. The street remained calm, the same tidy row of houses with trimmed hedges and early sunlight warming the sidewalks. Everything looked normal, yet something inside my chest had begun to shift. You said you worked for my husband, I finally told him. What was your name? Thomas, he replied. Thomas Reed. I repeated the name silently, searching my memory. Over the decades Daniel had mentioned countless employees, foremen, accountants, and engineers, but nothing about Thomas Reed came to mind. Perhaps he had worked in one of the earlier projects, back when Whitmore Development was still growing. Daniel's company had started small, just a handful of men and a single truck, before expanding into a respected regional firm building office complexes and residential developments across 3 states. I had watched that journey from the beginning. I had packed his lunches when Ryan was a baby and the company could barely afford a proper office. I had stood beside him at ribbon cuttings years later when his buildings became landmarks in growing towns. The idea that someone connected to that life now stood in front of me dressed in worn clothes and speaking in careful warnings felt surreal. What exactly did you do for the company? I asked. Thomas folded his hands together as if organizing his thoughts. I handled numbers for a while, he said. Project budgets, contractor payments, that sort of thing. An accountant, then. That detail caught my attention more than anything else he had said. Daniel had always trusted a very small circle of people with financial records. Those positions required loyalty and precision. And why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I tried telling your husband something once, Thomas answered quietly. But the situation around him had already started changing. I frowned slightly. Changing how? He hesitated again, and I could see he was choosing each word carefully, as if he understood the weight they might carry. When a business grows as quickly as Whitmore Development did, new people arrive. New partnerships form. Sometimes the old ways of doing things disappear faster than anyone expects. The explanation sounded polite, almost diplomatic, yet the meaning beneath it felt heavier. I thought about the months before Daniel passed away. His health had begun to decline. Slowly after his 72nd birthday. Nothing dramatic at first, just fatigue and shorter workdays. Ryan had gradually stepped in to help manage operations. At the time it seemed natural. Our son had studied business, and Daniel often spoke with pride about Ryan's ability to analyze deals and understand modern development markets. I remembered Daniel saying once at dinner, "Ryan sees opportunities one would never notice." Ashley had encouraged those conversations too, always praising Ryan's ambition. She often talked about expansion, about making Whitmore Development competitive in the new economy. At the time I believed she simply wanted the company to succeed. Standing in my driveway that morning, however, those memories began to rearrange themselves in my mind like pieces of a puzzle that had been turned the wrong direction. "Mr. Reed," I said carefully, "my husband trusted our son with the company. He told me that many times." Thomas nodded slowly. "I believe he did. Your husband loved his family. That was obvious to anyone who worked with him." His tone held respect, and hearing that eased something in me for a moment. Daniel had been admired by many people, not just for his success but for the way he treated employees and contractors. He believed in paying people fairly and finishing projects the right way even when cheaper shortcuts were available. That reputation had taken decades to build. I could not imagine him allowing anyone to damage it. Yet Thomas was still standing there with that same steady expression. "Then what is it that I supposedly do not know?" I asked. Instead of answering directly, he glanced at the clock display on my dashboard through the open car door. "What time is your meeting?" 10 o'clock. "And where?" "Whitmore and Clay Law Offices downtown." He nodded again, almost as if confirming something he already suspected. "That meeting is important," he said. "But what you hear inside that office may not match everything your husband planned." I felt the first real wave of unease then, not panic but a quiet tightening of my thoughts. "My son arranged the appointment," I said. "He told me the lawyer had prepared the inheritance documents weeks ago." Thomas lowered his voice slightly. "Did your husband ever mention a trust?" The question landed unexpectedly. "A trust?" I repeated. "Yes. A financial trust that would hold the company's shares and certain properties." I shook my head slowly. Daniel never discussed anything like that with me. Thomas looked thoughtful, as if weighing whether to continue. Finally he said, "Sometimes people create protections for their families without explaining every detail. Especially when they suspect something around them is changing." I felt the morning air grow cooler despite the sunlight. Daniel had always been careful with planning, but secrecy had never been part of his character. At least that was what I believed. Yet Thomas Reed was standing in front of me describing a possibility I had never considered. "If there is something I should know," I said quietly, "then please tell me clearly." He looked directly at me again, the same calm certainty in his eyes as before. "All I am saying is this," he replied. "Before you agree to anything today, ask one question. Ask who actually controls the Whitmore Development Trust." The sentence echoed in my mind with unsettling clarity. Ask who actually controls the Whitmore Development Trust. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could speak a familiar sound reached us from down the street. The low hum of Ryan's black sedan turning the corner toward my driveway. The sound of Ryan's sedan rolling slowly toward the curb made my heart tighten in a way I could not quite explain. For a moment I simply stood there, feeling as if the calm rhythm of my morning had quietly fractured into two different realities. In one reality, my son was arriving to help his widowed mother attend a routine meeting with the estate attorney. In the other, a stranger named Thomas Reed had just warned me that the story I believed about my husband's inheritance might not be the full truth. The two realities did not fit together, yet both were now standing in my driveway. Ryan's car came to a gentle stop along the curb, its polished black paint reflecting the bright morning light. I watched him step out from behind the wheel, tall and confident, adjusting the cuffs of his navy suit jacket in the same deliberate way Daniel used to before important meetings. For a brief second the resemblance between father and son felt so strong that it caught me off guard. Ryan had always carried himself like that, shoulders straight, movements precise, as if he understood exactly where he was going before anyone else did. Ashley stepped out from the passenger side a moment later. She wore a light cream-colored coat and dark sunglasses, her hair pulled neatly back, the picture of calm professionalism. If anyone had seen the two of them arriving together that morning, they would have assumed we were heading to an ordinary business appointment. I glanced back toward Thomas Reed instinctively, but he had already stepped farther toward the sidewalk, as if he did not want to draw attention. His posture was quiet, almost invisible again, yet I could still feel the weight of his last words echoing in my thoughts. Ask who actually controls the Whitmore Development Trust. Ryan spotted me immediately and gave a small wave before walking up the driveway. "Morning, Mom," he said with an easy smile. "I hope we are not running late." His voice sounded warm and familiar, the same reassuring tone he had used since Daniel passed away. For weeks Ryan had taken charge of nearly every practical matter, from insurance forms to company meetings, explaining that he wanted to make things easier for me during a difficult time. Until that moment I had been grateful for his help. Now I found myself studying his expression more carefully than usual, wondering if there was anything hidden beneath that confident smile. "No, we still have time," I replied calmly. Ashley approached beside him, offering me a gentle hug that smelled faintly of citrus perfume. "Good morning, Margaret," she said kindly. "I was just telling Ryan that the traffic downtown should be light this early." She pulled back and adjusted her sunglasses slightly while glancing toward the street. Her gaze briefly passed over Thomas Reed without lingering, as if he were simply another person walking through the neighborhood. The ease of that moment felt strangely important. If Ashley recognized him, she did not show it. Ryan followed her glance and noticed the man as well. "Everything all right here?" he asked casually. "Looks like someone stopped by." I hesitated only for a second before answering. "Just someone asking for directions," I said. The explanation came out smoothly, and I was surprised by how naturally the words formed. Ryan nodded without questioning it. "Well, we should probably get moving," he said. The attorney mentioned that the paperwork review could take a little time. He reached for the passenger door of my car, but Ashley gently touched his arm. "Why do we not all ride together?" she suggested. "It will be easier to park if we take one vehicle." Ryan agreed immediately. "Good idea." For a brief moment I considered mentioning Thomas Reed's warning right there in the driveway. After all, if there was truly nothing unusual about Daniel's estate, Ryan would surely explain everything without hesitation. Yet something inside me hesitated. The calm certainty in Thomas's voice had planted a quiet seed of doubt that I could not ignore. Instead of speaking, I simply nodded and walked toward Ryan's car. As I reached the passenger seat, I looked once more toward the sidewalk. Thomas Reed had stepped farther down the street now, standing near a row of maple trees that lined the corner. He did not wave or call out again. He simply watched as we prepared to leave, his expression steady and unreadable. Ryan started the engine, and the soft hum of the car filled the silence. "The meeting should be straightforward," he said while pulling away from the curb. "The attorney already reviewed everything with me earlier this week. We just need to confirm the asset distribution and update the company records." I listened carefully to every word. Confirm the asset distribution. Update the company records. The phrases sounded professional and reasonable, yet they suddenly felt incomplete somehow. "Your father planned things very carefully," Ryan continued. "He always believed in keeping business organized." Ashley nodded beside him. "Daniel built an incredible company," she added. "You should feel proud of that legacy, Margaret." I looked out the window as the neighborhood houses passed by slowly, their familiar shapes sliding across the glass like quiet memories. Proud. Yes, Daniel's work had been something to admire. But pride was not the feeling settling in my chest that morning. Instead I felt something closer to curiosity mixed with caution. As we turned onto the main road leading toward downtown, I remembered Thomas Reed's final instruction again with remarkable clarity. "Before you agree to anything today, ask one question. Ask who actually controls the Whitmore Development Trust." The phrase repeated itself in my mind like a steady rhythm, calm and deliberate. I did not know whether the man on my sidewalk had spoken the truth or simply shared a misunderstanding. But I did know one thing with absolute certainty. When we arrived at the law office that morning, I would ask that question. I sat quietly in the back seat as Ryan's car moved steadily through the morning traffic toward downtown, watching the familiar streets pass by while my thoughts circled the same quiet question again and again. Ask who actually controls the Whitmore Development Trust. The phrase sounded simple enough, yet it carried a weight that made the rest of the conversation inside the car feel strangely distant. Ryan was explaining something about the company's upcoming projects, his voice calm and confident as he described new development opportunities outside the city limits. Ashley occasionally added small comments, asking thoughtful questions or offering polite encouragement the way she always did during business discussions. To anyone listening from outside the car, it would have sounded like a perfectly ordinary conversation between family members discussing the future of a successful company. Yet I found myself noticing small details I had overlooked before. Ryan spoke with the certainty of someone who had already made decisions rather than someone waiting for legal confirmation. Ashley listened with the quiet attentiveness of someone who already knew the answers. And I sat there realizing how little Daniel and I had ever spoken about the final structure of his estate. For decades our life had followed a rhythm built on trust rather than legal explanations. Daniel handled contracts, permits, and financial planning while I focused on the home we built together. I had always believed that simplicity was part of the strength of our marriage. Now I wondered whether Daniel had protected more than he ever told me. The downtown skyline appeared gradually ahead of us, tall glass buildings reflecting the bright late morning sunlight. Ryan guided the car into the underground parking structure beneath the law offices with practiced ease, the echo of the engine briefly filling the concrete space as we pulled into a reserved visitor spot. "We are right on time," he said while turning off the ignition. Ashley checked her watch and smiled slightly. Perfect timing. I stepped out of the car and followed them toward the elevator, the cool air of the garage carrying a faint scent of motor oil and concrete dust. The building itself was one Daniel had admired for years. Whitmore and Clay law offices occupied the top 3 floors, known throughout the region for handling corporate and estate matters for large businesses. Daniel had chosen them decades earlier when Whitmore Development first began expanding into commercial projects. That decision had always made sense to me. Daniel believed in working with professionals who understood both law and long-term planning. The elevator doors opened with a quiet chime and carried us smoothly upward. Ryan pressed the button for the 32nd floor. None of us spoke during the ride. The quiet hum of the elevator cables seemed unusually loud, as if the building itself understood the importance of the meeting waiting above us. When the doors finally opened, we stepped into a reception area lined with dark wood panels and tall windows overlooking the city. A young receptionist greeted us with a professional smile. "Good morning. You must be Mrs. Whitmore." "Yes," I replied politely. "We have a 10 o'clock appointment." She nodded and picked up the phone on her desk. "Mr. Clay will be with you shortly." We sat in a row of comfortable chairs facing the windows. From that height the streets below looked small and orderly, cars moving through intersections like quiet patterns on a map. I folded my hands together and tried to steady my thoughts. The calm professionalism of the office felt reassuring. For a moment it almost convinced me that Thomas Reed's warning had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. After all, everything here seemed structured and transparent. Important legal matters were handled in places like this every day. Yet the memory of that quiet conversation in my driveway refused to fade. A few minutes later a tall man with silver hair and a carefully pressed suit stepped into the reception area. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said warmly while extending his hand. "I am Robert Clay. Please come in." His office was large but orderly, with shelves of legal books and a polished conference table in the center of the room. We took our seats around the table while he arranged several neatly organized folders in front of him. "First, let me say how sorry I am for your loss," he began gently. Daniel Whitmore was not only a respected client but also a remarkable man. I felt a quiet gratitude hearing those words. Daniel had earned that respect through decades of honest work. Mr. Clay opened the first folder and began reviewing the estate documents. He explained the basic structure of Daniel's assets, including company shares, property holdings, and investment accounts. Ryan listened attentively beside me, occasionally nodding as if the information matched what he already knew. Ashley remained silent, her hands folded neatly on the table. As the attorney continued speaking, I noticed how carefully he chose his words. Every sentence was precise, every explanation supported by documentation. Yet one phrase from Thomas Reed kept echoing in my mind, growing louder with every passing minute. Ask who actually controls the Whitmore Development Trust. Finally, Mr. Clay paused and looked up from the documents. Before we move forward with the final confirmations, he said, do either of you have questions? Ryan immediately shook his head. Everything seems clear. I felt the moment settle quietly around the table. This was the point where most meetings would simply continue towards signatures and formal conclusions. Instead, I took a slow breath and spoke the question that had followed me all morning. Yes, I said calmly. I have one question. Mr. Clay looked at me attentively. Of course. I kept my voice steady. Who currently controls the Whitmore Development Trust? The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but in that brief pause I noticed something I had not expected. Ryan's confident posture shifted slightly, and Ashley's hands tightened together on the table as if she had not anticipated that particular question. The silence that followed my question settled over the conference table with a quiet heaviness that I could not ignore. For a brief moment no one spoke. Mr. Clay remained still, his hand resting lightly on the open folder in front of him as if he were deciding how carefully his next words needed to be chosen. Across the table, Ryan shifted slightly in his chair, the confident posture he had carried into the room softening just enough for me to notice. Ashley's fingers tightened together in her lap, her expression still composed but no longer quite as relaxed as it had been only seconds earlier. It was a subtle change, the kind that most people might overlook, but I had spent decades reading the quiet signals that move through family conversations. I had learned long ago that silence often reveals more than words. Mr. Clay finally cleared his throat and glanced down at the documents again before answering. The Whitmore Development Trust, he began carefully, was established approximately 8 months ago at Mr. Whitmore's request. 8 months. The number echoed quietly in my mind. That would have been shortly after Daniel began reducing his hours at the office because of his health. I remembered that period clearly. Ryan had been spending more time handling company operations, and Ashley had been visiting our house frequently, often bringing takeout dinners or offering to help organize paperwork. At the time I had believed they were simply supporting Daniel during a difficult transition. Now the timeline felt slightly different. The trust was designed to ensure the long-term stability of Whitmore Development and certain associated assets, Mr. Clay continued. His tone remained calm and professional, yet I sensed he was aware that the conversation had taken a direction he had not originally planned to emphasize so early. I folded my hands quietly on the table and waited. Ryan leaned forward slightly. The trust structure is standard for companies at this level, he said smoothly. Dad wanted to make sure everything stayed organized if anything happened. His explanation sounded reasonable, the kind of logical summary one might expect from a businessman explaining corporate planning. But I did not look at Ryan. I kept my attention on the attorney. Who controls the trust? I asked again, my voice steady and respectful. Mr. Clay paused for another brief moment, then closed the folder in front of him and looked directly at me. Mrs. Whitmore, according to the trust documents your husband signed, there are 2 designated trustees responsible for managing Whitmore Development's assets. The word trustees hung quietly in the air. Ryan's shoulders straightened slightly, as if preparing for confirmation of something already expected. The first trustee, Mr. Clay continued, is Ryan Whitmore, acting in his capacity as executive director of Whitmore Development. Ryan nodded once, the small gesture suggesting that part of the arrangement had been entirely predictable. I allowed my gaze to shift toward him for the first time since asking the question. My son's expression remained calm, yet there was a careful attentiveness in his eyes now, as if he were measuring every reaction around the table. And the second trustee? I asked. Mr. Clay opened another folder slowly and adjusted his glasses before answering. The second trustee listed in the documents is Margaret Whitmore. For a moment the room felt unusually still. I blinked once, certain I had heard the words correctly yet surprised by them all the same. Ryan's head turned toward me almost immediately, a faint crease forming between his brows. Ashley remained silent, though I noticed the subtle shift of her posture in the chair beside him. Me? I said quietly. Mr. Clay nodded. Yes. Your husband specifically requested that you serve as co-trustee to ensure that family interests remained balanced. The explanation settled into the room with a quiet clarity. Balanced. The word carried meaning I had not considered until that moment. Ryan spoke again, his voice carefully neutral. Dad mentioned that possibility months ago, he said. But he also said Mom probably would not want the responsibility of managing company decisions. His tone sounded respectful, even protective, yet something about the phrasing caught my attention. Probably would not want the responsibility. It was an assumption spoken as fact. I looked at the documents on the table, then back at Mr. Clay. Does the trust require both trustees to approve major decisions? I asked. Yes, the attorney replied immediately. All major financial or structural decisions must be approved by both trustees. A small silence followed that answer. I could almost feel the air in the room adjusting to the new understanding. Ryan leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression thoughtful now rather than confident. Ashley finally spoke, her voice gentle. Margaret, managing a development company involves a lot of complicated financial decisions, she said. Ryan has already been handling those responsibilities for the past several months. I turned my head toward her calmly. I am aware of that, I replied. Her smile remained polite, but she did not add anything further. Mr. Clay looked between the three of us, clearly aware that the tone of the meeting had shifted. Daniel Whitmore was very specific about the trust structure, he explained. He believed that shared oversight would preserve both the company's stability and the family's long-term interests. I felt a quiet sense of recognition hearing those words. Daniel had always believed in balance. He trusted Ryan's ambition, but he also valued patience and careful judgment. Perhaps he had anticipated the need for both qualities guiding the future of Whitmore development. Ryan cleared his throat softly. Well, he said after a moment, that does not really change anything about today's paperwork, does it? Mr. Clay glanced down at the documents again before answering. It simply means that both trustees will review and approve any final arrangements regarding the estate's corporate assets. I allowed myself a small breath as the conversation continued. Across the table my son remained composed, yet the easy certainty he carried into the room earlier that morning had faded slightly. And in that quiet shift, I began to understand why Thomas Reed's warning had sounded so certain when he spoke it beside my car. For several seconds after Mr. Clay finished speaking, the room remained unusually quiet. The air inside the office felt calm on the surface, yet beneath that calm I sensed a shift that could not easily be undone. Ryan's expression remained controlled, but the easy confidence he had carried earlier that morning had softened into something more careful. Ashley sat perfectly still beside him, her polite smile unchanged, yet her eyes moved briefly between Ryan and the attorney as if she were calculating what this new information meant for the conversation ahead. I kept my hands folded gently on the table and allowed the silence to settle naturally. Daniel had always believed that important discussions should never be rushed, and I suddenly felt grateful for the patience he had taught me over the years. Mr. Clay adjusted the stack of documents in front of him and continued speaking in the same measured tone. The trust arrangement does not prevent Ryan from continuing to manage day-to-day company operations, he explained. However, significant financial decisions, property transfers, or structural changes within Whitmore Development must be approved by both trustees. Ryan nodded slowly as if confirming something he had already heard before. That makes sense, he said. Dad always believed in careful planning. His voice sounded steady, though I noticed the way he leaned slightly forward in his chair now, his attention more focused than it had been earlier. Ashley spoke gently beside him. Daniel wanted the company to stay strong for the future, she said. That is what matters most. I turned my gaze toward the tall windows behind the conference table. From 32 floors above the city the streets looked distant and quiet, the movement of traffic reduced to small patterns of light and shadow. For a moment I thought about the many mornings Daniel and I had spent discussing the company over breakfast. He had never treated Whitmore Development as just a business. To him it had always been a long promise, something built not only for success but for stability that would last beyond his own lifetime. That realization brought a quiet clarity to my thoughts. Daniel would not have created a trust without a reason. I looked back toward the attorney. When exactly was the trust finalized? I asked. Mr. Clay opened another folder and reviewed the date printed on the document. The final signature was completed 8 months ago, he replied. Your husband requested that the trust remain confidential until the estate review meeting. 8 months again. The number returned with the same quiet significance as before. Ryan folded his hands together on the table. Mom, he said in a calm voice, Dad and I discussed a lot of planning during that time. He wanted to make sure the company stayed competitive. His explanation sounded reasonable. After all, Ryan had spent years preparing to take on a larger role within the company. Yet something about the timing still lingered in my mind. Did Daniel explain the trust to you completely? I asked. Ryan hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. He explained the business structure, he said. But he also believed you should not have to worry about complicated details. Ashley nodded softly beside him. Daniel always wanted to protect you from unnecessary stress, she added. I studied both of them carefully, not with suspicion but with quiet observation. Protecting someone can mean many different things depending on who is making the decision. Mr. Clay cleared his throat again and slid another document across the table toward me. This is the trust summary, he said. It outlines the company's shares, commercial properties, and long-term investment accounts associated with Whitmore Development. I looked down at the document slowly. The numbers listed across the page represented decades of Daniel's work, thousands of hours spent planning projects, negotiating contracts, and building relationships across the construction industry. Yet one detail near the top of the page immediately caught my attention. The document did not simply describe financial assets. It described authority. Authority shared equally between 2 trustees. I traced the line of text carefully with my eyes. Margaret Whitmore, co-trustee. Ryan Whitmore, co-trustee. The balance Daniel had created now seemed unmistakably intentional. Ryan shifted slightly in his chair again. We can review the operational details later, he said politely. Right now the main purpose of today's meeting is simply to confirm the estate distribution. Mr. Clay nodded. That is correct. He opened another folder and prepared the next set of papers. Yet the moment did not feel as simple as Ryan suggested. The knowledge of the trust had quietly changed the entire structure of the conversation. I felt a calm determination settling into my thoughts. For the first time since Daniel's passing, I realized that the future of Whitmore Development was not something already decided by others. Daniel had ensured that my voice remained part of that future. Mr. Clay continued explaining the documents one by one. The legal language was precise, outlining property holdings, company shares, and management responsibilities. Ryan listened attentively, occasionally nodding as if following information he had already studied earlier in the week. Ashley remained composed, her posture elegant and still, though her attention seemed sharper now than when we first entered the office. I listened carefully to every word the attorney spoke, yet my thoughts returned briefly to the quiet man standing on the sidewalk outside my house that morning. Thomas Reed had not known the full details of the trust, but he had known enough to warn me that something important might be hidden behind the ordinary structure of the meeting. Without that warning I might never have asked the question that revealed the truth Daniel had carefully arranged. The realization brought an unexpected calm. I looked again at the trust summary resting in front of me and felt the quiet weight of Daniel's decision. Whatever challenges might come in the future, he had made certain that I would not face them without a voice in the decisions that mattered most. The meeting continued with the quiet rhythm of legal language and turning pages, yet the atmosphere around the conference table had changed in a way that none of us could fully ignore. Mr. Clay explained several additional documents connected to the estate, describing property holdings, company shares, and long-term investment accounts that Daniel had carefully accumulated over the years. His voice remained calm and precise, the tone of a man who had guided many families through similar conversations. Yet every explanation now carried a different meaning for me because I understood something I had not known before walking into the room. Daniel had made sure that the future of Whitmore Development would not belong to one person alone. It would belong to two voices working together. I listened quietly as the attorney outlined the structure of the trust in greater detail. The company's shares were held within the trust itself rather than distributed immediately through the estate. This arrangement meant that control of the company would remain stable while both trustees reviewed major decisions together. Ryan continued to nod occasionally as the explanation moved forward, though the energy in his posture had become more restrained than before. Earlier that morning he had spoken with the calm certainty of someone who expected a straightforward confirmation of plans already made. Now he seemed to be listening more carefully, as if recalculating something in his mind. Ashley remained silent beside him, her expression still composed and polite. From time to time she glanced toward Ryan, then back toward the documents on the table, as though measuring how each new detail might influence the future of the company. I allowed the conversation to unfold without interrupting, absorbing the information slowly. The truth was that I had never imagined myself sitting in a room like this discussing corporate structures and financial trusts. For most of my life Daniel had carried that responsibility alone, and I had trusted him completely to manage it wisely. Yet now I realized that he had prepared me for this moment in ways I had not fully understood. Over the years he had often explained the values that guided his decisions. Stability mattered more than speed. Transparency mattered more than convenience. And most important of all, loyalty to family mattered more than any financial gain. Those principles had shaped Whitmore Development from the very beginning. Hearing Mr. Clay describe the trust structure now, I could see Daniel's thinking clearly. He had built a system designed to preserve those principles long after he was gone. After nearly 30 minutes of reviewing documents, Mr. Clay closed one folder and placed another carefully in front of Ryan. "This document confirms the current operational authority of Whitmore Development," he said. "Ryan, you will continue serving as executive director responsible for day-to-day management." Ryan accepted the paper with a small nod. "That has been my role for the past several months," he said calmly. Mr. Clay then turned another document toward me. "And this document confirms that any structural decisions involving company ownership, property transfers, or corporate restructuring must be approved by both trustees." I studied the page carefully before signing my name where the attorney indicated. The pen moved steadily across the paper. Margaret Whitmore. The signature looked the same as it always had, yet the meaning behind it felt different now. It represented not only Daniel's wife but also a trustee responsible for protecting the future of the company he built. Ryan watched the signing quietly. For a moment his expression softened into something thoughtful, almost reflective. "Dad trusted you," he said gently. "He always said you had good instincts about people." The words sounded sincere, and I believed they were meant that way. Ryan had always respected Daniel's judgment. But I also sensed that he had expected the trust arrangement to function more quietly than it now appeared. Ashley leaned forward slightly and spoke in her calm, reassuring voice. "This structure will probably make decisions take a little longer," she said. "But it also ensures that everything stays transparent." Her comment carried a tone of practicality rather than resistance, yet I noticed how carefully she chose her words. Transparency can be comforting when everyone agrees with the outcome. It can feel very different when decisions require discussion. Mr. Clay continued guiding us through the remaining paperwork. Several documents confirmed investment accounts connected to the company, while others described commercial properties still under development across 2 neighboring states. The scale of Daniel's work became clearer with each page. He had not simply built buildings. He had created an entire network of projects designed to support the company's future for decades. When the final folder was closed, the attorney folded his hands and looked at us thoughtfully. "Your husband built something remarkable," he said quietly. "And he was very deliberate about how it should continue." I nodded slowly, feeling the truth of those words settle inside me. Daniel had always believed that the strength of a company came from the character of the people guiding it. That belief explained why he had chosen a structure requiring balance between ambition and patience. Ryan stood and adjusted his jacket as the meeting came to an end. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Clay," he said politely. Ashley rose beside him, offering the same professional courtesy. I stood as well, gathering the trust summary documents into a neat folder the attorney provided. As we prepared to leave the office, I noticed the way Ryan glanced briefly toward the papers in my hands. It was not suspicion or frustration. It was something more subtle, a recognition that the path forward for Whitmore development would now include conversations he had not fully expected. The elevator ride down from the 32nd floor was quiet. Ryan stood beside me, his expression thoughtful as he watched the floor numbers slowly descend. Ashley remained composed, her calm presence unchanged. I held the folder containing Daniel's trust documents and felt a quiet sense of clarity settle in my mind. Earlier that morning I had stepped out of my house believing I was simply attending a routine legal meeting. Now I understood that Daniel had left behind something much more significant than property or financial accounts. He had left behind a responsibility. And he had trusted me to carry it with the same care he had shown throughout his life. We stepped out of the elevator and into the quiet lobby of the building, the soft hum of the city returning around us as the glass doors opened to the sidewalk outside. Ryan walked slightly ahead, holding the door with the polite instinct he had carried since childhood, while Ashley followed beside him with the same calm composure she had shown throughout the meeting. From the outside nothing appeared unusual. 3 people leaving a law office after a routine appointment would hardly attract attention. Yet inside my thoughts something had shifted in a way that made the morning feel entirely different from the one I had imagined when I left home earlier that day. Ryan glanced at me as we stepped onto the sidewalk. "Mom, are you all right?" he asked gently. That was probably a lot of information at once. His voice carried genuine concern, and for a moment I saw the same boy who once asked me to check under his bed for imaginary monsters before he could fall asleep. Time changes people, but certain echoes remain. "I am fine," I answered calmly. "Your father planned carefully." Ryan nodded slowly. "He always did." Ashley stood beside us, adjusting her coat as the light breeze moved along the street. "Daniel built something very impressive," she said softly. "Not many people leave behind a company that strong." I looked at the tall buildings surrounding us and thought about the years Daniel spent shaping Whitmore Development into the company it had become. Every contract, every project, every late night at his desk had been part of a larger vision. Daniel never rushed decisions. He believed the best plans were the ones that could stand quietly through time without needing constant repair. Standing there on the sidewalk I understood that the trust he created was part of that same philosophy. It was not simply a legal structure. It was a safeguard designed to keep the company balanced even when circumstances changed. Ryan gestured toward the parking garage entrance. "We should head back," he said. "There is a management meeting this afternoon and I want to review a few things before that." I followed them down the short ramp leading into the underground garage, the cool air settling around us as we approached the car. The echo of our footsteps carried lightly across the concrete floor. As Ryan unlocked the doors, Ashley turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Margaret," she said politely, "now that the trust details are clear, we will probably need to coordinate future decisions more carefully." Her tone remained respectful, but I sensed the careful choice behind her words. Coordination implies discussion. Discussion implies agreement. "Yes," I replied simply. Ryan opened the driver's door but paused before getting inside. "Mom," he said, "you know the company can move very quickly sometimes. Development deals do not always wait for long conversations." I understood what he meant. Whitmore Development operated in an industry where timing mattered. Land contracts, financing agreements, construction schedules. Decisions often needed to happen quickly. Yet Daniel had always balanced speed with caution. "Your father believed that important decisions should never be rushed," I said quietly. Ryan gave a small thoughtful smile. "That sounds like him." We settled into the car again and began the drive back toward the residential part of the city. The streets were busier now as late morning traffic moved through downtown intersections. I watched the buildings pass outside the window while my thoughts drifted back to the beginning of the day. When I had stepped outside my house earlier that morning, I believed the meeting would simply confirm plans already decided by others. Instead, it had revealed a structure Daniel had carefully placed beneath everything we thought we understood. A shared responsibility. A balance of authority. Ryan turned onto the highway leading out of the city. For several minutes no one spoke. The quiet inside the car was not uncomfortable, but it carried the thoughtful weight of new understanding. Eventually, Ashley broke the silence in her calm voice. "The company is entering a period of growth," she said. "There are several projects already under discussion." Ryan nodded. "2 commercial developments and a residential complex outside Cedar Ridge," he added. Dad had already reviewed the preliminary plans. I listened carefully. The projects Ryan mentioned sounded familiar. Daniel had spoken about them during the last months of his life, explaining how each development could strengthen the company's long-term stability. At the time I had listened simply as a supportive wife. Now those same plans carried new significance. They represented decisions that would soon require approval from both trustees. The thought did not bring anxiety. Instead, it brought clarity. Daniel had not left the future of Whitmore development to chance. He had created a system designed to ensure thoughtful choices even after he was gone. As the car moved through the quieter suburban streets near my home, I noticed something else that made me pause. On the far corner of the block near my driveway stood a familiar figure beside the row of maple trees. The worn coat and steady posture were unmistakable. Thomas Reed. Ryan slowed the car as we approached the house. "Looks like someone is standing near your yard again," he said casually. Ashley glanced toward the sidewalk but said nothing. I watched Thomas quietly through the window as the car rolled to a stop in the driveway. He did not wave or call out. He simply stood there with the same calm expression I remembered from the morning. Ryan turned off the engine. "Do you want me to ask what he needs?" he offered. For a moment I considered the question. The man had appeared twice in one day with quiet warnings that had already changed the course of my understanding. Yet he had never asked for anything in return. "No," I said gently. "I will speak with him." Ryan nodded and stepped out of the car while Ashley gathered her bag from the seat. I remained seated for a moment longer, looking toward the sidewalk where Thomas Reed waited patiently beneath the shade of the maple trees. The folder containing Daniel's trust documents rested on my lap, its weight both literal and symbolic. Earlier that morning the stranger had warned me that the truth about my husband's inheritance might not be as simple as it seemed. Now, the meeting was finished, yet I sensed that the full story Daniel left behind was only beginning to unfold. Ryan closed the car door and walked a few steps ahead toward the house, while Ashley remained beside the passenger door adjusting the strap of her bag. I stayed seated for a moment longer, watching the quiet figure of Thomas Reed standing beneath the maple trees across the sidewalk. The late morning sun filtered through the leaves above him, casting soft shadows across the pavement. From where I sat, he looked almost exactly as he had earlier that day, calm and patient, as though time moved differently for him than it did for the rest of us. The folder containing Daniel's trust documents rested on my lap, and I could feel the quiet weight of it pressing gently against my hands. Ryan turned back toward the driveway when he noticed I had not stepped out yet. "Mom," he called lightly. "Everything okay?" I opened the car door and stepped outside. The air carried the warm scent of early autumn and distant cut grass from a neighbor's yard. "Yes," I replied calmly. "I just want to speak with him for a moment." Ryan followed my gaze toward the sidewalk where Thomas stood. His expression shifted slightly, not suspicious but curious. "The same man from this morning?" he asked. "Yes." Ryan hesitated for a brief moment, then nodded. "All right," he said. "Ashley and I will be inside." He and Ashley walked toward the front door while I crossed the short stretch of lawn toward the sidewalk. Thomas did not move as I approached. His posture remained steady, his hands folded loosely in front of him. When I reached the edge of the walkway, he gave a small respectful nod. Mrs. Whitmore, he said quietly. Did the meeting go the way you expected? I considered the question carefully before answering. Not exactly, I replied. But I learned something important. His eyes studied my expression with calm attention. About the trust, he asked. I felt a brief pause pass through my thoughts. Yes, I said slowly. You knew there was a trust involved. Thomas gave a small thoughtful nod. Your husband mentioned it once. The statement caught my attention immediately. You spoke with Daniel about it? I asked. Not directly about the details, Thomas explained. But he believed certain protections were necessary. I looked down the quiet street for a moment before speaking again. Why did you warn me this morning? His answer came without hesitation. Because Daniel Whitmore was a fair man, he said simply. And I believed you deserved to understand what he had built. The sincerity in his voice felt unmistakable. This was not someone asking for money or favors. It was someone delivering information because he believed it mattered. You said earlier that things around the company started changing, I reminded him gently. Thomas nodded slowly. When businesses grow, new influences arrive, he said. Some people focus on building something strong for the future. Others focus on moving quickly toward profit. I understood the distinction he was describing. Daniel had always believed that success should never come at the cost of stability or trust. Did my husband think something like that was happening? I asked. Thomas hesitated for a brief moment, as though choosing his words with care. He believed the company was entering a period where careful oversight would be important, he said. That is why he created balance. The word balance echoed softly in my thoughts, the same concept Mr. Clay had described earlier during the meeting. Daniel had designed the trust not to control the future but to guide it. 2 trustees. 2 perspectives. 2 voices ensuring that the company would remain aligned with the values he believed in. You worked with Daniel for many years? I asked. Not as many as others, Thomas replied. But long enough to know the kind of man he was. His eyes moved briefly toward the house where Ryan and Ashley had entered. Your husband trusted his family, he added quietly. But he also understood that responsibility can change people. I stood there for a moment absorbing those words. Responsibility can change people. The truth of that statement felt both simple and profound. Leadership often reveals qualities that remain hidden in ordinary situations. I thought about Ryan, about the confident way he had spoken during the meeting, about the subtle tension when the trust structure became clear. My son had always been ambitious. Daniel admired that ambition, yet he also believed ambition should be guided by steady judgment. Perhaps the trust was Daniel's way of ensuring that balance would remain intact. Thank you for telling me what you knew, I said quietly. Thomas gave another small nod. I only shared what I believed was important. For a moment neither of us spoke. The neighborhood remained peaceful, the distant sound of a lawn mower humming somewhere down the street. Finally I asked one more question. Why are you still here? Thomas looked down the road thoughtfully before answering. Because sometimes the first piece of the truth is only the beginning. I studied his expression carefully. What do you mean? He met my gaze calmly. Your husband built protections into the company structure, he said. But there may still be things inside Whitmore Development that deserve a closer look. The words settled quietly between us. Earlier that morning I had believed the meeting with the attorney would answer every question about Daniel's inheritance. Instead it had revealed that the story of Whitmore Development was still unfolding. I looked back toward my house where Ryan and Ashley were waiting inside, unaware of the conversation taking place on the sidewalk. Then I looked again at the folder in my hands containing the documents Daniel had prepared so carefully. Responsibility can change people. Daniel understood that. And now, standing beneath the maple trees outside my own home, I began to understand something else as well. The trust he created was not simply a legal arrangement. It was an invitation for me to see the company he built with clearer eyes than ever before.